I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Brad Spielberger. Not quite sure what happened there, but I think we're here now. Brad, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I think the Bears just pulled off a very prudent trade for Robert Quinn to the Philadelphia Eagles, which I'm sure we'll dive into. And yeah, we can hear you crystal clear now.
Yes. All right. So give me your initial reaction to the Robert Quinn trade. You are a Bears supporter, so let us know your initial thoughts here.
Yeah, so, obviously Robert Quinn set the Bears franchise single season sack record with 18 and a half last year. It was a great year for him, no question. But, it's why we look at a lot of stuff like pressures, pressure rate. It was a really, really strong year for him in terms of converting a unsustainably high level of pressures into those sacks, bunch of strip sacks, and just really great play, not to take away from him. But, the regression now to one sack on the season, a sub 10% pressure rate, 40-something overall grade is not super surprising. And so you get this trade now. The Bears are going to retain the entire salary above the minimum. I am reporting that, I guess, per source. So a minimum salary will go to Philadelphia for about $620,000, excuse me. And the Bears will get that fourth round pick, which as of right now is 133 overall, which of course is the last pick in the draft, given that Philly is currently, projected to pick last.
Yeah, it's a really interesting trade for the Eagles because they've gotten some good pass rush production out of Hassan Reddick, out of Brandon Graham, even out of TJ Edwards at linebacker. I know that's been minimal snaps, only 17 snaps, but he's got 8 total pressures this season. Also out of Javon Hargrave, Josh Sweat. But this just adds another piece to that Eagles pass rush so that they can rotate those players on the edge, get a lot of pressure out of the quarterback. They're 6-0 on the season, and obviously this just makes them better. A fourth round pick is a significant amount to give up, but clearly they are going all in what basically everyone around the NFL has been saying is a extremely weak NFC.
I think that's a big part of it. They did lose Derek Barnett, their former first rounder, who they brought back on a 1-year kind of flyer this offseason. A good player. I think he gets a little bit of flack because he hasn't really lived up to his top 15 pick billing, but a solid rotational edge rusher. He was lost for the season earlier this year. So, like you said, they love to rotate defensive linemen, bring guys in different situations. Him and Brandon Graham, the two elder statesmen, can now kind of come in and play a lot on third downs and obvious passing situations. And I have no doubt that Quinn will be very effective next to their kind of murderer's row of defensive linemen. But yeah, the last part I think is key. I mean, this is not a good NFC conference. It also keeps Robert Quinn maybe off the Los Angeles Rams. They are out there looking for edge rush help, maybe off a couple other teams looking for, kind of bolster that position. So it kind of works, in all those favors, for Philadelphia.
Absolutely. And just from a Bears perspective, I mean, they're coming off a solid win against New England Patriots. I think that, Ryan Pace, Poles actually spoke before that game and was saying that, they've got a lot of faith in Justin Fields, that they're happy with the job that Matt Eberflus is doing. It seemed like they were a team on the rise. So are you surprised at all that they were willing to trade away Robert Quinn?
Interesting too is he was kind of clairvoyant in that discussion and said not only do we believe in Fields and think we're going to see a better player from him, but also said I think we're going to see him used in a more beneficial capacity and use his skill set better. And funnily enough, that's exactly what we saw. I want to say he had 12 design rushes in that game and had like 18 on the season before that point. And the interesting kind of connection is that's exactly what we saw last year with Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia. They were drop back heavy. Nick Sirianni wanted to throw the ball a ton. They kind of had the bye week or maybe a mini bye week, just like Chicago off a Thursday game, and totally transitioned to a run heavy team with that quarterback position. It's worked for both so far.
Yeah. And I was at that game, that Patriots-Bears game. It clearly did not go the way that either one of us expected. If you want to listen back to Monday's show and hear a couple of idiots talking about a Monday night game. But I think that Justin Fields has just really improved overall as a rushing quarterback this season. And I mean, he was, weaving through traffic. Obviously, he's always been a guy who's 230 pounds, runs, essentially a 4.4 40. So he always had that ability to be that scrambling quarterback. But the more design runs that they make for him, I think the better he's actually going to become as a runner and the more threatening that offense is going to be. And, Khalil Herbert had a good game. David Montgomery had a good game. And that does, I think it will eventually open up passing lanes for Justin Fields a little bit more as well. But one thing that I was really impressed about, and we didn't intend to get too heavy into Justin Fields here, but it relates to the conversation with Robert Quinn. I was impressed by the fact that he threw an interception against a Bill Belichick coach team, against a tough defense, and it did not seem to affect him one bit in that game. He bounced back right away, and the Bears offense was off and running.
I'm obviously a little bit biased, I will say that, but the one thing you never see from him is that he does not seem to get rattled, and he's obviously had a lot of reasons this season, at least, to get pretty rattled. It does not seem to bother him. Maybe a little bit with getting the ball out quickly after taking some bad sacks, but you probably want that realistically. And kind of to answer your question, I guess I didn't really address, but Travis Gibson and Dominique Robinson, a sophomore and rookie player on the edge. I think they want to get those guys more snaps. Robinson's been a good find for them, a 6th-round pick in the draft, and Gibson was a 5th-rounder under Ryan Pace that has shown flashes when he's played. So I think those guys, opposite of a guy like Al-Qadim Muhammad, who's kind of more of an edge setter and a run defender, but, Quinn is a good player, but I think it makes sense for the long-term vision of this franchise. Again, that 4th-round pick is notable for them. It's an important pick for them. They have a lot of places they need to address. And I just don't think a 32, 33-year-old Robert Quinn was really in their long-term vision. I mean, obviously he wasn't.
As far as the Eagles go, I mean, through the first 6 weeks of the season, obviously they had the bye this week, they were absolutely far and away the best team in the NFC. And I'm curious to see, how well they can keep this up. Obviously, Robert Quinn certainly helps. But it is funny that as weak as the NFC is, someone even mentioned this in the comments, NFC East is looking pretty strong right now with the Eagles, with the New York Giants, with the Dallas Cowboys. I think that based on, what we see on paper, the Eagles definitely look the best, especially after this Robert Quinn trade. But as I mentioned, like everyone around the NFL is always talking about how weak the NFC is. NFC East might be strongest division, certainly in that conference, one of the strongest divisions in football right now.
A great point. And the Dallas Cowboys did add Jonathan Hankins, the nose tackle from the Las Vegas Raiders. So they're shoring up their defensive line as well. And it's funny, two teams that have maybe the two of the best defensive lines already, both adding more defensive line help. Very different players that bring very different things. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It's probably a reaction to, look, we want to not only make the NFC playoffs, but ensure we can get maybe the #1 overall seed, which they're obviously not going to get if Dallas surpasses them. They do have the game in hand, of course. But yeah, I mean, you look at this team, I think it's hard to find a true weakness, but I think you could say a little bit of edge help, maybe a depth corner piece, maybe a depth wide receiver. But, I think this is a move where it's kind of a luxury, but now if they have another injury there or if things happen on the back end, they can get enough pressure home from their front seven that maybe that negates some of that. So it's I want to say an all-in move, but it's definitely we are trying to, this 6-0 isn't a flash in the pan. It's not anything we're comfortable with. We're trying to go full throttle here and maybe win the Super Bowl.
All right, we hit the breaking news here. Let's get to our fresh off the wire segment. And one of the things that is fresh off the wire right before we start recording is that Field Yates of ESPN reported that Mac Jones will start Week 8 against the New York Jets. I don't think that this comes as a major surprise, but the major surprise was the fact that Bill Belichick rotated snaps at quarterback on Monday against the Chicago Bears. And even after doing that, would not name a starting quarterback on Monday, on Tuesday, or even in this afternoon's press conference when he said, we'll have to see how practice goes. Said he doesn't want to deal in hypotheticals, all of these things. They come off the practice field. They tell Field Yates that Mac Jones will be the starter against the New York Jets. And yeah, I mean, this is the way that it had been trending really all along, is that everyone expected Mac Jones to retain that starting role. But I think that some questions did start to surface a little bit once Bailey Zappi came to that game after the Mac Jones interception, after Mac Jones did not re-enter the game. And then even after Mac Jones had started, Bill Belichick still would not name a starter off the top of the week.
Far be it from me to question the greatest coach in the history of professional organized sports, but it's a weird situation, and it's not, I think, a handling of it very conducive to really inspiring confidence in either guy. I mean, I'm not sure it really helps either player to kind of go in and out. And Zappi, I know he said he is always prepared to play, but that he didn't really know or have any indication. And then Belichick said, well, the guys that needed to know knew, the team leaders, and Mac Jones knew. It's just kind of a weird situation.
Zappi knew he would play. He didn't know when he was going to come into the game.
Gotcha. Important clarification, no doubt. But so I think after that, and look, I mean, Zappi did not look good in that game. Had what, 2 interceptions of his own, and also just didn't really look particularly strong. So it's getting weird now to where, is there actually an issue with Mac Jones beyond just his health? Because they also said the ankle was a problem. He had 2 scrambles in that game against Chicago where he was humming for Mac Jones. Didn't look fast compared to Justin Fields, but he was moving out there. So it is a bizarre situation. And I just wonder, at what point are you kind of just keeping everyone in limbo and confusing everyone? And would it make more sense to just name a guy and just put that question to bed?
Yeah, I thought it was handled. I think it was one of the worst decisions that Bill Belichick has made as head coach of the Patriots, is to have that quarterback rotation, to handle it the way he did, to have Mac Jones start and be pulled after 3 series immediately after an interception. I mean, I was in the stadium. The Patriots were getting booed after the second 3-and-out. And it was funny. Me and some Patriots beat writers were talking before the game of like, okay, when do we hear the boo birds come out? One person said, after 1 3-and-out. One person said after an interception. I said, like, I think it'll take 2 things: 2 3-and-outs, 2 interceptions, whatever it would be. After 2 3-and-outs, Patriots fans were booing. And when Zappi came in, there was Zappi chants, huge reaction from the crowd when Zappi came in. And that's just such an uncomfortable position to put your starting quarterback in, to get booed and to have to hear chants for your backup quarterback. And I do believe that if Zappi had finished the game the way he started it, with those 2 touchdown drives, we might seriously be talking about Bailey Zappi being the starting quarterback here in week 8. I think fortunately for Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi did not finish that game the way he started. So now Mac Jones comes back in there. But no, it was just a bizarre situation. It is good now that on Wednesday we have some clarity that Mac Jones will start against the Jets. I would expect him to be the starter as long as there's no other injuries. But you mentioned the ankle. If he's not healthy enough to play a full game, then why is he out there for 3 series? Why are you planning on putting him back in there in the second half? And I was even watching him during his press conference after the game, and he was kind of like, he was standing there hunched against the podium, and he was on one flat foot and his other foot was kind of on his toe, like twisting around his ankle. I was like, oh, I wonder if that's his healthy ankle or the bad ankle. And then he actually switched feet and started doing it with the other one. And it's not like he was doing that in pain. I think that the ankle mostly felt fine for him. And now clearly it does, since he took most of the first team reps in practice today. Will start against the Jets. More quarterback news. New Orleans Saints turning to Andy Dalton seemingly full time. That's what Dennis Allen said today, that Andy Dalton will start this week and that it is not related to an injury for Jameis Winston. So unfortunately, Jameis Winston seemed to lose that job on an injury.
Yeah, Ian Rappaport hinted at this all of the week leading up to the Arizona Cardinals game. And, despite Dalton throwing 2 pick sixes, one of them was a freakish catch by Isaiah Simmons, the linebacker, a one-handed snag kind of out of midair. Again, it was not a good throw. Obviously, it was a pick 6, but, a bit of a fluky return there. And Marco Wilson's, I think, was kind of a bad ball. But he went on to throw 4 touchdowns in that game, and that was without, Michael Thomas, no Jarvis Landry. So I think he has been better. I mean, he's a top 10 graded quarterback for us right now. Still a small sample size, but he was good against Minnesota in that London game, I thought. He's played some solid football. And we talked about this. I mean, Jameis was just looking for the touchdown on every single throw, kind of making some of those old school Jameis mistakes that we unfortunately, came to be familiar with. And again, I hate when I bring this up and make it seem cynical, but there's a lot more money for Jameis Winston tied to playing, tied to production than there is for Andy Dalton. And the New Orleans Saints are in a horrific financial situation. So maybe that's a factor as well. If the 2 guys are close enough, maybe go with the guy that you're not paying an extra couple, $100,000 a week based on how they perform.
Yeah, Andy Dalton did, obviously, as you mentioned, have those 2 pick sixes, but he also actually graded pretty well for us in that game. So it's not shocking to see him get more opportunities. And we'll see how he looks once all those wide receivers are healthy as well, because like you mentioned, I mean, he's been without most of his top targets over these last few weeks. So you might as well see what he looks like when you can get Jarvis Landry back in there, when you do have Michael Thomas back there, Chris Olave healthy off that concussion. So all those things are good. Let's get into some trade rumors right now. 2 wide receivers that seem to be the most popular. There's really, I guess, a third in there as well. But Houston Texans wide receiver Brandin Cooks, Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver Chase Claypool, and Denver Broncos wide receiver Jerry Jeudy. Seems like to pull off a deal for one of those wide receivers, a team would have to give up a day 2 pick, which I think for, a wide receiver like Brandin Cooks, wide receiver like Chase Claypool, or even Jerry Jeudy, not a bad deal for a potential team. And as far as teams who are, out there looking at wide receivers, and I guess you could throw Odell Beckham Jr. into the mix as well, even though he's a free agent and not a trade candidate. It would be the Kansas City Chiefs. It would be the Green Bay Packers. It would be the Los Angeles Rams. And that's despite the fact that they are getting Van Jefferson back from that injury. But anything else you can tell us about at least those three wide receivers and potential teams for them?
Yeah, I think it's interesting where Cooks obviously just signed a 2-year, nearly $40 million extension. The other two guys, you're getting that rookie contract value. With Jeudy, the 5th-year option as well as a first rounder, with Claypool, about a 1.5-year rental, and then maybe figure out your steps going forward from there. I still would bet the most likely to be moved of those guys is Chase Claypool, maybe in part because the team lost again and is now 2-5. He is clearly the number 3 wide receiver on that team. He's a good player, but I think they're coming to grips with the fact they probably need to break down a little bit, build back up. You have George Pickens, you have Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth back healthy now, looked pretty good in that game against Miami as well. I want to say he had a concussion in his own right. So I still think that one makes the most sense and is the most likely to happen. I think the Green Bay Packers are the team to watch there. But like I talked about last week on this show, I was told it was going to take a day 2 pick. Like you said, I think a 3rd-round pick. I don't know if anyone offers a second there, but a 3rd-round pick for Chase Claypool, I believe, gets it done. And at least personally for me, Green Bay has always been a very frugal team. They build through the draft. They don't make these decisions. Yes, it has worked for them for the majority of the time. Packers fans may argue it hasn't because they haven't won Super Bowls. They've made 5 NFC championships. A lot of fans would love to have just that. But this year, when you have Aaron Rodgers and maybe one of his last 2 or 3 seasons of his career, I think you have to, if that is the true price, as I was told, a 3rd, you got to go do that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and if I had to play matchmaker on these teams, I think the Packers team that's kind of looking for size at that position. So I would probably stick Chase Claypool on the Packers. I think that's the one that makes the most sense. I think that Odell Beckham Jr. probably makes the most sense for the Kansas City Chiefs. There's been a lot of buzz around that. I know that after last week, it certainly doesn't look like they need more wide receiver help. But injuries can occur at any moment. And we're seeing around the league right now, a lot of teams dealing with injuries at wide receiver, the Saints, all these teams. So you could always use more depth there. And as far as Brandin Cooks goes, if he is traded, I don't know, it kind of makes sense to send him back to the Los Angeles Rams. I think that they are a team that could use some more speed at that position. It would be kind of strange to see him back there. But if we're giving Odell Beckham to the Chiefs and if we're giving Chase Claypool to the Packers, then yeah, maybe you throw Brandin Cooks back there on the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, they could use a lot of help on offense, which brings us to another player to discuss here. That's Browns running back Kareem Hunt. It's been pretty interesting to see how the Browns have divvied up touches at their running back position so far. Nick Chubb right now has 135 touches on the season. Kareem Hunt only 81. Kareem Hunt has 66 carries for 263 yards, 15 catches for 87 yards. I think it's interesting that, Kareem Hunt has 19 targets. Nick Chubb has 14 targets. So they're really not that far off right now, even being used in the passing game. And the Rams were already looking after Christian McCaffrey. It would make some degree of sense if they do feel like they need more help at that running back position, even with Kyren Williams coming off of injured reserve within the next 3 weeks, to maybe next go after Kareem Hunt, pay a little bit less for a running back who can't give you quite as much, but could still be effective out of the backfield.
Yeah, he makes a ton of sense. He obviously asked for a trade, and I think Cleveland probably thought before the season, why would we entertain that if we could be a team that could win a lot of games, maybe make a playoff push? And frankly, even though they're 2-5, they could have won 3 or 4 of those 5 in the loss column. So I don't think it was a crazy thought for them to have. But now, at this point, you have a young guy in Jerome Ford, your 5th-round pick, who's on IR, but will be back eventually. Dearness Johnson, a guy you may take a pay cut who has 0 carries so far on the season, and you reported all the incentives he has tied to rushing yards. He hasn't been able to earn any of that. So you have depth there. You have the ability. Then also, why not add draft capital when you just gave a king's ransom to go get your quarterback into Deshaun Watson and could use any draft compensation you could possibly get for a guy on an expiring contract that you're probably not going to pay because you extended Nick Chubb last offseason, and I think that's through 2024, I want to say, maybe 2025. So it makes all the sense in the world for Cleveland to do this. His salary is pretty low, so he is affordable for a lot of teams. I think that's kind of a part of all these trades, too, when everyone throws these names out. not a lot of contenders can make trades for guys with big salaries. That's why the Bears just agreed to eat almost all of Robert Quinn's salary that they're allowed to eat. So that's a factor as well. And it works again in the favor of trading Kareem Hunt to a team that could use a running back, which the Rams are certainly at the top of that list.
And the Dearness Johnson situation is pretty interesting because he was very good last year. He was actually one of our top graded running backs. I know it came on a slightly smaller sample size there, but he has not got a single carry on the season. He has 2 catches for 9 yards on 2 targets. So he's been inactive a lot of the time. And he's a player that you could just bring up off the inactive list and serve as your number 2 running back behind Nick Chubb. And as you mentioned, they've got Jerome Ford in there as well. So they've got bodies at that running back position. And it does make sense to recoup some of that draft capital, trade him for what you can at this point, since the Browns are off to kind of a rough start here. One more player to throw out there as far as trade rumors are concerned, and that's Bradley Chubb. I believe that Jordan Schultz had a report about this, correct, Brad?
That is correct. And I think his name also makes a ton of sense. It is kind of rare to see a team trade a, former top 5 pick edge rusher and a good player. He has an 82 plus pass rush grade for us right now. The crazy thing, that's actually 3rd on his own team behind Randy Gregory, who is on IR, and Baron Browning, who is expected to miss a couple weeks. They're 3rd rounder from last year who converted from off-ball linebacker to edge rusher. But they have the luxury of, you have a guy in a contract year on his 5th year option right now, probably wants a significant payday this offseason, and you already have 2 good players at that position. Kind of funny considering they just did this last year with Von Miller, but I think a very similar scenario makes a ton of sense. And this is a guy, I think the Los Angeles Rams make a lot of sense here. AFC to NFC, they need edge rush help. They're dead last for us in pressures from edge defenders. I think he helps them more than a running back or another position would in actually getting back to where they want to be.
For sure. Couple other pieces of injury news. Looks like Ezekiel Elliott, he's dealing with a knee injury right now, a sprained knee. Seems unlikely to play against the Bears. Is that correct?
His hit he took against the Detroit Lions last week, it was right in the knee. Yeah. It was one of the more you watch TV, we're not doctors, but it was the most obvious, that looked really, really bad. Yeah. He came back in the game, scored a touchdown in the second half. But, yeah, it sounds like per Clarence Hill of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, he does not expect him to play. It's a knee injury, an MCL injury, and a deep thigh bruise as well. They have a bye the week after and then play at Green Bay, at Minnesota. Maybe that is kind of, coming into the thought process as well.
Yeah, and they've got Tony Pollard behind him, so anyone who drafted Tony Pollard in fantasy might finally be able to cash in on that now that the Dallas Cowboys offense should be back to normal there with Dak Prescott. Russell Wilson was getting some rehab on the plane to London. He certainly is talking like he's going to play in that game this weekend, so looks like Russell Wilson will be back on the field on Sunday against the fellow 2-5 Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, Brett Rippon was a bottom 5 graded quarterback for us last week, was second to last with 4.9 yards per attempt. So, despite all the Russell Wilson jokes and, the actual struggles on the field, this is still, a big return for them. They need this. Doug, you've told me before, you like doing high knees on the plane in the aisle as well, right?
Yeah, I like to really just harass everyone around me on an airplane, just really piss them off, make the plane shake a little bit too. I think that's fun. I think it's really important to get some exercise when you're on a plane, especially what would that be, a 8 or 9 hour flight, something like that from Denver to London.
Oh yeah, true.
So yeah, no, anytime that someone wants to sleep on a plane, I like to interrupt them by doing high knees on the airplane. That's very important to do. All right, one other thing that we missed after Monday's show, this happened on Monday. James Robinson traded to the New York Jets. That was for a 6th round pick that can turn into a 5th round pick if James Robinson hits some, incentives or landmarks, whatever it would be there. And the Jets reacted very quickly to this, to the Breece Hall news. Breece Hall ruled out for the season on Monday. Jets turn around and trade for James Robinson. Honestly, I'm kind of shocked the Jaguars were that ready to trade James Robinson. I know that Travis Etienne has moved past him on the depth chart, getting a lot of work in there. But, I know the Jaguars are 2-5, like I just mentioned, but the Colts just benched their quarterback. Tennessee Titans have gone through some struggles this season. I don't know, to trade a very useful backup running back for what might only turn into a 6th round pick. I was a little surprised. I'd say I was a little bit surprised by that.
It's a good point when you look at the AFC South. It was funny. He barely played in that game against New York, and a lot of people, the other New York, the Giants, and a
Right.
lot of people said, oh, they knew they were going to trade him. Well, the team they traded with didn't know they needed a running back until after their game. So I
Right.
don't really think, right, I don't think that's why he did not play in that game. Maybe that is an indication. The condition is something I've never seen before, so I want to point this out. He has
Right.
360 rushing yards so far, I believe. The condition is he needs to have 600 total rushing yards for the season. So all he needs to do is run for 240 yards, and it makes the sixth turn into a fifth, which I think is a
Right.
great deal for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I do totally hear where you're coming from, though. If they get hot, make a run, Tennessee, all our metrics say they're not as good as their record right now. They could be in that, discussion to win the AFC South, and he's a solid, valuable, early down running back for them. End of the day, though, Etienne has sort of really taken over the workload. He had a pretty costly fumble in that game. He's kind of had a handful of those, but he's looked really good outside of some mistakes. But, I hear you both sides of it. And the Jets, I think, want to send a message to this team of, we're not going to give up. We are a team that wants to compete. We were told how impossible our schedule was this year. We've kind of made it through at 5-2 so far, and we're not going to lie down because of one, important injury to Breece Hall. So I think it's a tone setter for them as well.
Yeah, and they definitely did need more running back help after Breece Hall went down. I thought it was kind of interesting that the 49ers released Tevin Coleman basically like immediately after that trade, because that would have made a lot of sense for the Jets to sign Tevin Coleman. And obviously, I don't think he would have been as effective as a early down running back, bell cow type of guy that James Robinson would be. But I think that was probably the player that a lot of people expected would have been that next running back for the Jets after Breece Hall went down with an injury, but the timing did not work out for them. Let's take a quick break. PFF Wire is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow? Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. Let's just quickly go through our rumor roundup section here. I wrote my weekly rumor roundup on pff.com this morning. Check that out. Lots of stuff on trade candidates, but also the Daniel Jones contract situation, which we'll just kind of touch on really briefly here. It's an interesting one, though, because I don't think that there's a big rush for the Giants to get anything done with Daniel Jones. They did not pick up his fifth-year option, and if they do intend to keep him next season, they'll probably lose some money out of the deal. In hindsight, I think they played it smart by avoiding the situations that the Panthers did with Sam Darnold, that the Browns did with Baker Mayfield. But you bring in Brian Daboll, he kind of rejuvenates Daniel Jones. And now you're probably looking at a situation where you're either going to need to sign Daniel Jones to a long-term extension, or use either the transition tag or one of the franchise tags on Daniel Jones. The complicating factor there, though, is that if they use one of the tags on Daniel Jones, that means that they can't use it on Saquon Barkley. So one of these guys, if they want to keep both, will have to sign more of a normal contract. The other one will get that tag. Ultimately, I was talking to someone who thought that the best course of action would be for the Giants to use the transition tag on Daniel Jones. That would be right around $28 million. And the key there is that with the franchise tag, you cannot extend that player's contract after a hard July 15th deadline. With a transition tag, they could continue long-term extension talks into the season.
A great contract, or a great CBA note, I guess I should say. Thank you for the education earlier this week. We chatted about this, and I should have known the answer, and I didn't. And I think this is extremely important because it's one aspect too. I've always kind of wondered where the value comes in with a transition tag. Yes, you can match any offer sheet another team makes, but you don't get any draft compensation if you don't match that offer sheet and the player just leaves. So, I kind of wondered, like, hey, why would you not just feel comfortable with the franchise tag? If you're comfortable enough placing one, why not just place the one that protects you? But this is one huge area where it potentially lets them let things play out. If you do tag him, and let's say he doesn't play well the first 10 games of next year, yeah, you spent $28 million, but you didn't have a Carson Wentz or Jared Goff situation on your hands and give the guy a massive signing bonus and a bunch of guaranteed money and then trade him later on. So that was a great catch by you. Great note there. The other point, though, the original decision, This is the first example, I think, of the fifth-year option used to be only guaranteed for injury, and a couple years ago, it's now fully guaranteed the day it gets placed. And so I would bet money if it was the old rules, the Giants would have placed the fifth-year option on Daniel Jones. I know he'd struggled.
Right.
I know he turned the ball over 1,000 times a season, but I think he'd shown enough flashes. They probably would have done it and said, look, if he plays poorly again, but he stays healthy, we'll just kind of cut him and it'll be no harm, no foul. And so I still think it was the right decision. I think teams should be willing to take this risk and say, yeah, like you said, it was 21 million. Now they'll pay 28. So you pay a little bit more, but it's a great problem to have. The more complicating factor is that both him and Saquon Barkley are having these bounce back great seasons, and you of course can only place one tag on the two. Yeah. That's where it gets a little tricky, but I still think that the process was sound. The result is a negative out of a positive, I guess, which, there are worse things to happen.
One other note, I don't think this is necessarily going to happen, but if they do choose to tag Saquon Barkley, there is also the option of doing some sort of like pseudo one-year deal for Daniel Jones where you wind up giving him the same amount as the franchise tag or the transition tag. You throw on some void years. You present it the same way you did with the Taysom Hill contract, like 4-year, $140 million deal. That's actually just a one-year deal with some void years on top of it. And that's kind of a compromise, I guess you could reach without reaching that long-term extension. But I do think that Daniel Jones has some leverage given some of the other quarterbacks that are hitting the open market. I will mention, though, Tom Brady, going to be a free agent after this season, does have a history with Brian Daboll, and one of his children lives in New York. So, out of all those franchise quarterbacks, he would be the one that I think would be an upgrade over Daniel Jones. One other note, Kentucky and Tennessee play this weekend, and both of their quarterbacks are kind of on the rise right now as far as draft prospects go. Kentucky quarterback Will Levis has been mentioned as a top 10 pick. Some people, not everyone, even thinks that he could wind up being the first quarterback taken in the 2023 NFL draft. And for Tennessee, Hendon Hooker, another riser in the draft. There's definitely a lot of people there's at least few people that I've talked to who see him sneaking into the first round, potentially being kind of that 32nd overall pick, the same way that Lamar Jackson was. He's really impressed people in interviews. He's going to be 25 in January, which is kind of a hindrance. And I will say that there are other people I spoke to who do not yet see him in that first round category. But I think this is a really important game for both of those players because whoever wins might see their draft stock rise even more.
Yeah, I think it's a huge statement game because Levis also did not play well against Florida. Not that, the quarterbacks don't play each other, but Anthony Richardson is a fun prospect that a lot of people are very high on and think he has all the tools to become, a really, really good player at the next level. And Levis did not look good in that Florida game really at all. But he also came on It's Just Football, our show with Trevor Sikkema and Mike Renner. And before he came on the show, Mike actually had him above CJ Stroud for the first time this year on his big board. So he's buying in. He sees all the tools. Levis compared himself to Josh Allen, which I'm sure every, big body, big arm quarterback will throw that comparison out there as they should going forward to kind of build their brand and build their stock. But no, there are a lot of people buying in. I'm still, Team Bryce Young for life, but not that that's relevant to what we're talking about. I just threw that in there. But yeah, no, it's very interesting to hear those guys' stocks rising. Hooker's a good player. I think the age, though, is a really, really, kind of complicating situation there.
I will say I've heard at least one person compare him, I don't know, I guess like the preparedness wise, like maybe not necessarily personality wise, but how driven he is to a player like Russell Wilson, who was also on the older side when he was coming out of Wisconsin. I think that he was 24 years old. And yes, age definitely does matter. I think it matters a lot more for like the potential that you can show as a quarterback, a lot more so than a team being like, all right, this is going to be our quarterback for 10 years. And it doesn't really necessarily matter if he's going to be 35 in 10 years or if he's going to be 32 in 10 years. But as far as upside and potential, you definitely want to get the younger player who's showing potential rather than the 25-year-old. Let's talk a little bit about Thursday night's game. That is the Ravens and the Buccaneers. The Ravens, I'm correct in this, the Ravens are favored by 1 point in Tampa Bay, correct?
Yes, small road favorite.
Yeah, that's a little bit surprising. The point total is 45.5. I know the Buccaneers have struggled this season, but the Ravens have kind of struggled as well. They've really struggled to close out games in the fourth quarter. They finally did it this past weekend. But what's your initial thought, at least on that line?
Yeah, it surprised me too. I do have a small bet on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers plus 1.5. It's kind of just hey, Tom Brady's a home favorite, which is not a good way.
Right.
I would recommend gambling, but sometimes you got to just go with your gut. But the Buccaneers injury report probably sheds a little bit of light on this spread. No Carlton Davis at cornerback, no Sean Murphy-Bunting at cornerback. Russell Gage, I don't think is going to play. Julio Jones, I want to say is a game time decision. Luke Gadecki, who did get benched last game, but is technically their starting left guard, will also not play in this game. Or maybe he didn't get benched, but he got hurt, which is why he's not playing. So anyway, long story short, a lot of injuries for Tampa Bay. They obviously have struggled mightily. But, like you said, it's always when you see Tom Brady as a home underdog against a team that, they're good, but struggled to move the ball through the air again last week. Haven't been incredible on either side of the ball. They've been good. It's an eye-opener for sure, but the injury list is much better for Baltimore than it is for Tampa. And how often do we say that?
Yeah, right now, Cameron Brate, Carlton Davis, Russell Gage, Luke Gadecki, Sean Murphy-Bunting, and Antoine Winfield Jr. all out for the Buccaneers. Akeem Hicks and Julio Jones, both questionable. On the Ravens side, Calais Campbell is out. They've got a bunch of guys who are questionable, including Rashad Bateman, Gus Edwards. We'll kind of see how all those guys progress through the week. But yeah, Buccaneers injuries have already piled up. They've had some issues on defense as well. And it's strange. I would think that everyone's just kind of waiting to see Tom Brady look like Tom Brady again. And I don't know. I mean, you hate to kind of make assumptions and everything like that, but everyone else is that what's going on for Tom Brady, personal wise, and doesn't seem like he's got the full buy-in and everything this year. I think at some point that flips. I think that he does return back to form and look like Tom Brady again, but it all kind of just depends on how the rest of his team looks, because Tom Brady is usually not the same type of player when his weapons or his offensive playmakers, the players around him, are not as good. Any player props that you like in this game?
I'd be lying if I said I looked, so I'm not prepared. But I will say Leonard Fournette keeps running the ball about 2 yards a clip. So I do have one. I know his rushing and receiving prop is around 82.5 yards combined. I would take the under there. I would take the under on rushing yards. I don't know what that is exactly, but they have not been effective running the ball whatsoever. The Calais Campbell injury is big for Baltimore, but Justin Madubuike is kind of taking that third-year leap we've seen from some players, playing really well in the interior. Jason Pierre-Paul said he wants to show the Bucs what they're missing in his return. Obviously, was with the Bucs for a while. Yeah. I think they're going to have to throw in this game again to keep up with the Ravens offense. I don't like, the production numbers for Leonard Fournette on an efficiency basis have been dreadful. I don't really like any of his props. I'll take the under on a lot of his props.
I'd say that just kind of looking through PFF Green Line right now, go to pff.com/betting/best bets. Mike Evans, his receiving yard total is set at 68.5. That's at -117. And Greenline's got the over on that one. It's only a 0.2%, but I like the over on that one for Mike Evans. I could definitely see Mike Evans and Chris Godwin getting heavily involved here. All right, let's just take one quick question before we go here, because this one just caught my eye. Any chance Tom plays for the Niners next season? Going back home, no wife to worry about. I know people have speculated about Tom Brady and the 49ers forever, and I don't know. I mean, it's going to be fascinating if Tom Brady actually does hit free agency again next season, and if he intends to play. I know that he said that, what did he say last week, that he's not planning on retiring anytime soon, whatever that was, but it was a question related to this year for him. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess I could see him playing another season, but this season's going so poorly that's probably best for him to retire after this year.
Yeah, I think it's probably true, but maybe they pitch him on. They don't have any draft picks to speak of whatsoever. But hey, come play with Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel and all these guys. Come back to the Bay Area where you're from, like you said. I mean, they should at least make a phone call, right?
Yes, they definitely should. All right. Well, that will do it for today's edition of PFF Wire. Make sure to subscribe to PFF Wire on Apple, Spotify. There's links in the description down there. If you want to click on those, make sure to rate and review PFF Wire on those as well. Download the PFF app and make sure to subscribe to PFF Plus. That is $79.99 a month. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyed. And we will be back with you guys again on Friday when we go game by game, give all of the injury and fantasy updates. We'll see what other trades come and hit the wire before then as well. There's also the NFL trade deadline on November 1st. So maybe we'll throw in a extra special show next week as well after that trade deadline if anything goes down. But if anything doesn't, then we'll probably be back on that normal Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. But make sure to keep it on PFF.com for all of your news and analysis.